There's a quiet kind of beauty in the places we take for granted. Libraries, roller rinks, strip malls, storefront churches, local museums. These are the everyday spaces that shape the rhythm of American life, and yet they're disappearing. Photographer Ben Geier has spent the last several years documenting them before they fade entirely from view. His book, Viewing Hours, America's Vanishing Culture, is less about nostalgia and more about presence, about seeing what's still here, what's holding on, and what might soon be gone. Shot with a sense of restraint and deep observation, the images are quiet but resonant. They ask us to slow down, to look more carefully, and to consider the cultural space that define our communities, not through spectacle, but through use and memory. Ben's photographs are full of tension and stillness, empty chairs, echoing hallways, corners of rooms that hint at stories untold. The work speaks to a shifting cultural landscape, but also to the power of the ordinary. It reminds us that photography can serve as witness, as elegy, and as a love letter. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. Well, Ben, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You know, your work in this book is really great. I always had an affinity for Americana. And I'm a little jealous of people who have found the time to go out there and take those road trips we all dream about to make these pictures. But it's for me, it's kind of poignant because I've lived in Los Angeles all my life. And one of the things I've noticed about Los Angeles that you kind of comment in the book is the American tendency to not really treasure its memories, you know, its history.
Yeah, I mean,
and how
I think that's
things are just
America
really quickly sort of torn down and eliminated for what passes as, you know, improvements, which is a questionable comment.
Yeah, hardly.
But you know, you capture a real diversity of beautiful architecture, signage, things that are really absolutely distinctively American. Tell us about, you know, the inception of this project, because you've been working on it for a while.
Yeah, you know, when I've been a photographer, you know, since I was a teenager. You know, I was more so into photographing, you know, live music and, you know, promo photos for bands and all that stuff. But like, you know, I think right around 35, I started to get into more so like banded stuff. And I feel like that kind of started to like lead me into doing more of this Americana stuff. And really, I started doing the Americana stuff right around COVID because it was a good excuse to get out of the house. And, you know, I was watching, you know, a bunch of kind of like old movies that I like No Country for Old Men and Paris, Texas, and just like so many of these, you know, movies that are kind of centered around like just road travel. And I was so curious if, you know, a lot of these places still existed, if the signs still existed. So for me, it was, you know, during COVID, it was just getting out of the house. It was a good time to just get out of the house. Nobody was on the road, and just track these places down, photograph them, and really kind of just try to archive a lot of these places because, you know, like we were saying, these places just, they're either crumbling or, you know, they're in a big city where they get torn down. Yeah. Just to, you know, pave the way for, you know, bigger, kind of cheaper buildings. You know,
you talk about early on returning to a mall with some friends that you used to go to as a kid, or you used to get your hair cut and things like that. And that it really it wasn't just visually interesting, but it brought up some emotions for you. Talk to me about that, and how do you think those feelings sort of informed the work that you did for this project?
Well, so I'm a designer as my profession. I do a lot of video. I do a lot of like photography as well. So I feel like that experience of, you know, going into like this abandoned mall that I grew up going to, getting my hair cut, hanging out with all my friends there. A lot of what I saw when I went back there, years later is, obviously it's like kind of a nostalgic experience going back there and seeing everything in ruins. But I really like the design elements of a lot of these spaces, and especially that one. I don't know if it's just because it's I have a nostalgic tie to a lot of these places, but I love to just see them, through a different lens, going back and seeing it abandoned. But yeah, I'm just attracted to the design of, a lot of these signs. Yeah. And it just even old brands that just don't exist anymore. I don't know if Venture was it was kind of like a five and dime store, similar to Kmart. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was only a Midwest thing, but I've always been attracted to big, bold brands like that. So it's more so I'm so attracted to it because I want to document it and just to keep it for my own kind of, memory.
Yeah. Going through the images in the book, it was really kind of fascinating how, a lot of these places are very regional. It's not like so much today is like chains and franchises. I was visiting some friends who had retired to a city outside of San Diego. I forget the name of the town. But as we were driving through there, I noticed that, the strip malls, where they have all these stores, hardware stores, restaurants, and all of them were like chain stores.
Right.
And that if you wanted to go somewhere where it was where you could go to a family owned restaurant, you really had to make the effort to do that, because all of these homes had been built. And as a result, these retail spaces around it, but all of them were really familiar chain and retail stores. And then if you wanted something that was kind of felt unique, homey, that had some quote unquote character to it, you really had to go out there. And it seems like in this country, we've sacrificed distinctiveness, character for the sake of convenience.
Right. And you want to know what, I feel like that's, I live outside of Chicago, and this whole area is just all chains. That is why I go out on the weekends and just, I take back roads, just take, I'll be gone for 16 hours of the day, just going in one direction and then coming back. But my whole idea is just, I'm going to search out all the, really rural towns, take the back roads, and you just find the most incredible stuff. Because, most of these towns, not the fact that they're just poor, but they just don't have the means to restore a lot of these places. Right. So they kind of just sit there. But you do find the best signage, best kind of abandoned restaurants and all that stuff on the back roads. And
how did you find them? Did you what kind of research was involved in you hitting the road? Like you shot on Route 66, which is famous for this kind of signage, for sure, hotels and restaurants. But when you're exploring other parts of the country, which are less traveled or maybe a little less familiar to most folks, how do you, maximize your time to make sure that you find the kind of things you're interested in photographing?
Yeah. It's such a kind of time suck, all of it. Yeah. What I like to do is collect locations that I know that I eventually want to get to. If I see a sign, I put it on a map, and I just collect enough of these kind of locations or enough pins to warrant a trip. So, if there's, I have 15 locations in, eastern Iowa, I will make the trip and make sure that I am just taking back roads the entire way. And you just end up finding the most random, fun signage or, building fronts. Yeah. So that's really how I do it. There is a lot of research that goes into the locations that I'm searching for. It's I'm such a huge fan of mid-century, modern kind of architecture and just places with color, lots of color.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm always looking for. So usually it's, like what I said, when I start to gather enough pins in a certain area, I will make the effort to take a weekend trip, just, searching it and taking the back roads to get there.
How much knowledge did you have, architectural styles and trends, during that 40, 50, year period? Was that something that you were kind of tuned into?
Yeah, it's like I definitely I'm not so into like architecture, but there's definitely things that like catch my eye. Like very obvious like architects, like Frank Lloyd Wright, like Mies, like those are like ones that I definitely make an effort to get to. And then anything else that I find along the way is usually just, bonus for me.
Yeah. Well, I really like your sense of line and shape throughout these and the color palette that you use for these images,
right,
which is no small feat considering how long you've been working on it. And also in terms of, you never know what you're going to get in terms of lighting, the things that are surrounding it,
right,
the obtrusive car that's, parked right in front of the spot, all those things. Right. But, that sort of, does that sort of sensitivity come from, for what you do for a living normally? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I think part of the attraction too is because I'm a designer. So like those things are what called me, like the bold patterns, like the weird color palettes, the really pastel, very 50s color palettes really called to me. I mean, even like sometimes I make trips around like, I find a building front that has a really unique like type, like font used on it, or like a hand painted font that I just obsess over. So I feel like I need to make the trip, and it's I spend so much time searching for stuff like that.
So what is kind of a typical challenge you face when you finally get to a destination where you have you have a facade or a storefront that you're interested in photographing?
So yeah, I mean, I think the challenges are definitely like you said, I don't like when, modern day stuff is in the shot. So it's really trying to line up the shots. Well, you have the time, I could spend 12 hours driving somewhere, and then you get there and there's a row of cars in front of the storefront. Yeah. So you're either waiting or trying to shoot around it, or, you get there and I really love to shoot in really bright light, like really sunny skies, but you get there and it starts pouring. So I'm always trying to like pivot based on the conditions. But I mean, that's just being a photographer, I guess.
Yeah. And, in some of these trips you were traveling with a carload of kids, which most people dream about doing this.
I feel like they
solo on the road,
they want to
but
kill
it's quite the accomplishment that you have your kids in tow who don't have much patience for photographers.
Right. And they're older. They're a little bit older now. So like either they want to come with or they don't at all. So I had to stop making like all of the stops that I wanted to on some of these trips because they just, they wanted to murder me.
But you mentioned in the book about the experience of going to the site where Buddy Holly plane crashed, and that was kind of a seminal moment, for you, not just as someone who had admired the artist, but for your kids.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that trip, and we've been back since, but that trip made such an impact on the music they listen to. So there's just cool things that come out of those road trips that are so unexpected. I mean, I'm in like my 40s, and I feel like whenever I say like, oh, Buddy Holly's like one of my favorite artists, everybody's like, either who the hell is Buddy Holly, or, just it seems odd that, somebody in their 40s is so into, an artist from the 50s. So I think it's great that, the road trips kind of create memories for, my kids like that.
Yeah. And I think it's a wonderful experience to share with your children, right? You're out there, you're in the road, you're doing your art, you're doing your photography, but it's it's one of those things that, as kids, I remember those trips. I don't know how many families do them now. I think everyone's like, so doesn't want to get out.
Yeah. Always destination, like trips. And
right. It's about getting A to B. It's not about anything in between.
Right. Yeah.
There's
go
ahead.
Go ahead.
No, please.
No, I wish more people would take road trips, because I feel And like, you just don't know how incredible they are until you start doing it and forcing yourself to make the stops and stuff like that. Like I do think that it clicks with most people when they take the time to actually book a road trip and make the stops. I think they always have like a really incredible experience. I mean, that goes for like so many people that like I've known that are not road trippers, but they will be like, oh, I want to do the American road trip. I want to go along, Route 66. And they have like the best time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're taking your time. You're not rushing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. The trip is the vacation. Right. It's like, yeah. You were working
on this for about 10 years, right?
So yeah, like I started it in 2017. When I started it, I didn't realize that I was creating a book. It was more just about documenting these places before they were gone. So one of the first photos I took for the book was in a town called Cairo, Illinois. It's like a very kind of abandoned, I wouldn't say, it's more of like it's close to a ghost town. Yeah. So, it was at one point such a massive hub along the Mississippi, and it had gotten flooded so many times that it just kind of, everybody started moving away, and it really fell into disrepair, and it barely exists today. So that was the first photos that I took for the book were in Cairo. But yeah, I don't think that I was never expecting to do a book. That only came about, last year. So for me, it was more so like when I knew that I was doing a book, it was how do I organize it? How do I really try and tell, a visual story with like, the photos that I have. So
when did it change from, you making these individual images in order to sort of document it to the realization that, oh, this is a project?
Yeah. Like, I don't know if it ever really clicked like that. I get so obsessive about like certain things, when I was doing abandoned photography, it was all about that. Mm-hmm. And, when I started doing, the theater facades and marquees and all that stuff, I did start to recognize that I had such a collection of like really unique looking things, and together they really, tell a story. But it took me a while to recognize that like I had like bits and pieces of a book.
When you would go to these towns and people would see you, because, in towns were not hugely populated, and then see some person that's unfamiliar, taking a picture or something, they're going to be curious. Right. So what was some of the conversations that you had?
Honestly, most people are like really welcoming because they are such small towns. Like they don't see people. They are curious because, most of the people that I'm talking to, like in these small towns, they grew up there. Mm-hmm. So they're, when they're talking to me, they're like, whoa, what are you taking a photo of that for? Like they've seen it their entire life. So they don't see the significance mm-hmm. in it. They just see it as, oh yeah, that place that we all ate at for, 20 years and then it shut down and it's been vacant ever since. It's like they don't understand why I'm doing it. I would say that like since the book came out, it's like whenever I make these stops and I talk to people, they're, I show them the book and they're like, oh, wow. Because they get an idea of like what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And then they can see those, those places that they grew up with that have just been sitting there, for the last 20 years. And they I think, look at it like in a new way, because they can kind of see what you're trying to do based on the book, like, what your interests are, and how it adds to the collection or the story.
Yeah, and it touches on, nostalgia, but I think to a mm-hmm. greater degree, at least for me, it kind of reflects what, we as a country and as society have just decided to sort of give up on for the sake of convenience, right. for, commercialization, for, consistency and all those mm-hmm. things. And, it's more than just, interesting buildings and architecture that you lose as the result.
Right.
Because if you visit a place and it looks just like every other place,
right.
The same sort of townhouses and homes and, these commercial centers that could be anywhere. I remember I went to Dallas. My wife was approached by a headhunter to possibly move out to Dallas, Texas. And I was just amazed by that kind of uniformity that was there. And I'd grown up in Los Angeles, which, has a lot of that, but there were pockets of the neighborhood where I felt like were very distinctive.
Yeah, right.
And that, it's kind of sad that we kind of have lost that. And part of it is just because of commercial interest has been probably the biggest factor. Like, as you mentioned, so many of these towns, as the young generation leaves because there's no work for them there,
Right.
There's no one to be able to provide the sort of financial infrastructure to be able to sustain these communities and to rebuild and to, refurbish these places.
Right. You just mentioned Dallas, and I think it's Dallas, right outside of Dallas somewhere, that they just created the first 3D printed Starbucks store. Oh, wow. Which is mind blowing to me. Why they would even, first of all, want to do that, because 3D printing a store just sucks any life out of the building to me. And it also puts so many people that would actually construct that out of a job. Yeah. So the way America's heading with, a lot of this stuff is pretty disappointing.
You are also a musician, right?
I am, yeah.
And you had an affinity for punk early on. And punk is so much about, you don't necessarily have to have known how to play a guitar or play the drums or the bass. Right. You just kind of go to it. You don't even know how to write music. And you just, there's an immediate immersiveness into the art. Yeah. Where there is
it's experimental.
Yeah. How do you think that sort of informed your photography?
Well, I mean, that is how my photography started, was more so just, okay, so let me back up just a second. I feel like I did a previous podcast, and the way they described my photos was somewhere between art and archive, which I thought was really great. And it stuck with me because when I first got into music and the whole punk scene out, in Chicago in the, early 90s, I used to go to a place called the Fireside Bowl. It was a place it was a bowling alley that just converted into, having live shows every single night. It was one of the most incredible experiences, of my youth, was going to these shows, performing, at some of these shows, and I would document all of them. So I had a Sony Handycam that I would just go and film everything. Eventually it turned into photography, but it's so important to me that just recently I started to recognize that I am so obsessed with archiving things. So I think it's funny that this book is it's so focused on archiving these things before they're gone. But yeah, so, I used to film all these shows, photograph all these shows. I was in bands. I would photograph bands for album covers and promo shots. And that really kind of just is what started me in the whole photography. I was just obsessed with design and photography. So I've never put the camera down. I've always just kind of evolved it, over time.
This episode of The Candid Frame is supported by AltadenaPhotographers.org, a grassroots nonprofit created to help photographers who lost archives and gear due to the recent wildfires. The organization runs a registry that lets affected photographers list the items they need replaced, from lenses and lighting to computers and film scanners. Donors, both individual and companies, can respond with direct support. It's a photographer-to-photographer system of care and generosity. To learn how to contribute, visit AltadenaPhotographers.org. Every donation helps someone to get back to the work they love. Did the fact that you were using your photography for the work that you were doing sort of helped you to gain confidence as a photographer to feel like I am a photographer. I'm using my photography. It's getting seen.
Yeah, like it was a weird time because, you know, I was trying to play music. I was learning how to be a designer. I was learning how to be a photographer. But it was also a time where you're so young and you really don't know how to do any of it like really well.
Yeah.
It just, all of it just feels totally experimental. So to me, I didn't realize that I was like learning as I was experimenting, but that was the thing. It's just, I learned by, you know, just figuring things out and just doing it ourselves.
And that's a great lesson, you know.
Yeah, right.
Book smarts only get you so far.
Right.
Tell me about, you know, the idea of turning this into a book. How did that sort of gestate and what did you do to sort of make it happen?
So Trope, the publisher, came to me and recommended that we do a book. And it was for a bit, like, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. Like, I think they were maybe interested in some of the, you know, abandoned stuff that I had done like years prior. But I felt so at home and so confident with like the photos that I've been gathering for, you know, on all these road trips. That's the stuff that like really speaks to me. So the more that I recommended that to them, I'm like, oh, we should really focus on, you know, the road travel, the road trips and roadside stuff. They were like, sounds great. We really don't want to do a Route 66 book, which is totally understandable because for me, you know, Route 66 is it can be kitschy, but there's been so many books about it over time and really great books, but we just knew that we didn't want to do a Route 66 book. So it just took me a while to start really thinking through what photos I had, how they could be categorized into, you know, chapters. And I still went out like even after, and, you know, there's certain chapters that I think were kind of like falling short with some shots. So I still had to go out and, you know, shoot for some of that. But really the chapters, I wanted to kind of break it down into like, they're not in any particular order, but I really wanted to break it down so it felt more like a road trip, like things that you would actually experience on a road trip or you would experience traveling through some of these like really small rural towns.
How did Trope find you in the first place to approach you about doing the book?
Sam at Trope, me and Sam have like followed each other's work for, you know, years. So he just reached out to me, back in 2024, talk about a book.
So you had worked with him, you collaborated with him, or you just followed each other on social? Yeah,
I mean, years, probably, I mean, at this point, it was probably 20 years ago. We had worked together at a design agency that he owned called The Design Kitchen. But yeah, I mean, I hadn't seen Sam in probably, I don't know, 15 years or so. So it was kind of a nice little note to get from him.
A little surreal about the book.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So how did you have to reevaluate the work that you had done, and when it came time to sort of design the book and start making selections of what images you had and as you said, what other images you still needed? Yeah,
like I started layouts of the book pretty early on. And I just because like I'm such a visual person, it's like I need to like be able to drag things around and figure out like what chapters could be, and you know, like how many images do I think are going to, you know, exist within a chapter, like which ones really, you know, pair well together or really tell the story that I was going for. Yeah, I mean, it took me a while of just playing with layouts and really trying to figure out how I was going to categorize everything. And then from there, it's when I felt solid on that, there was definitely like chapters where I'm like, all right, this needs, you know, like at least 6 more photos. And I had like a good 4 or 5 months to really lock in all of those shots that I hadn't, you know, that were just missing.
So you didn't bring in an independent designer to help you with it?
So I did like very, very kind of like basic, you know, like bare bones, like layouts that I handed over to Trope. And they have an incredible, you know, in-house like design staff. So they laid everything out the way that it is.
Okay.
Yeah. But I was definitely part of it early on when we were really trying to like lock in the overall vibe of, you know, the book.
And you know, it's always interesting when you sit down and get to this phase where you have to go through the work, you have to make selections, pairings, layouts and designs, and you get to rediscover the photographs as a result. Right. So what did you what did you learn and surprise yourself by as a result of doing this?
Well, so I'll speak to the categories, the chapters. I mean, I really had you don't recognize that you have such an obsession with like a certain thing until all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, I have like close to like 200 photos of like old like gas stations. like maybe that's its own chapter. Like I was kind of blown away at the volume of photos that I had and how I had to narrow it down. It was tough. But I think that was the biggest thing, was just really parsing through the volume of photos that I have. Yeah,
because it's a long time to be shooting. So you have tens of thousands of images to select from.
Right. Yeah. So many trips, so many photos. And another thing that I really had a hard time with is, so many of these photos are so scattered across the U.S. I didn't know if I was going to like focus on the Midwest or, Midwest and Southwest. And it was just kind of all over the place. Right. And that's why I ended up selecting, the chapters that I did, is because I just felt like that was a good way of just encompassing like a really strong road trip like narrative.
Was there a certain image or a collection of images that sort of helped you to sort of really crystallize what you're trying to do with the design of the book? You mentioned sort of discovering that they were, you could break things up into chapters based on subject matter and things like that. But was there something where you had sort of a moment where suddenly what you were doing made a lot more sense than it did before?
Yeah. I mean, I would say theaters. The theaters chapter to me is the most cohesive chapter out of them. They're all shot in a very, very similar way. It's, just straight on, and just the way they look visually all next to each other, it's just so cohesive. I feel like that to me is what I want all of my work to kind of feel like. It's just really, really cohesive. Even, it could be so many different colors, so many different designs, but they all have a similar aesthetic when you look at them. And I feel like theaters it absolutely does that. Storefronts is like similar, but theaters, I think, just totally nails the look that I'm always trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I really have to give you a lot of credit, because the book feels like it's really rich with the diversity of approaches, right? Because you could get into where everything is shot the same way, and within very short order, you're kind of like exhausted. Okay,
yeah,
I get it, but I don't feel that way as I go through the book. I mean, you have the sections with the theater, that sort of uniformity in terms of approach, but I think overall, I think that you visualize it in a way that goes beyond simply documenting it, right? You're framing it so that whatever you're sort of emotionally gravitating to, that's sort of triggering you sort of emphasize that largely through composition and the light and the color, which is great. Yeah. And I think it's a great lesson for anyone who's working on a project where they're photographing similar subject matter, how you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel and shoot it from every different angle and wide angle lenses. It's like you narrowed down the palette with which you were working with and just worked within that, within that wheel well.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's important to make them look natural, like in their, their natural kind of element. A lot of people ask me whether or not, how much I like edit photos, or how much I, if there's things that I Photoshop out, and I'm like, I don't, because I feel like it's the most important, one of the most important pieces to me is the texture, and is like, it is all like the, kind of decay, and I don't want the photos to look too refined or slick. I think there's kind of like beauty in, the fact that they are run down. They take on like a whole different feel, and with like the textures and the grime and all that stuff.
Very early on when you started, you mentioned in the book that you started shooting film, and at some point you transitioned to digital.
Yeah.
How did that sort of change how you were doing things?
Well, yeah, I mean, I do love film. I feel like it's so expensive for me. Like, I would love to, shoot film, but it's expensive and it's so time consuming. And I know for a lot of people, like the time part is like they love that part, developing and all that stuff. But for me, it's I like digital because it's just so immediate. So for me, my transition from film, I feel like film would slow me down too much. So when I started shooting digital, it really not that it just speeds things up, but I'm able to shoot so much more. Yeah. It's just, I'm able to do so much more, like, with my time and just it's nonstop shooting. Every weekend it's like nonstop shooting.
Were you using fixed focal lengths or zooms? And if so, why did you?
So I use a Canon R5C, and I really use this camera because it's like a true hybrid. It's an incredible photography camera, but it shoots incredible video. Another aspect of, a lot of stuff I shoot is, like, especially if it's like a working neon sign, I love to capture that, like, video of that, just to have it, just for like archival purposes, to see how it animates and, glows. Yeah, I mean, I love the R5C. I usually shoot like, I love a 50 millimeter on there. That's usually what I try to shoot most of my stuff with, is the 50 millimeter. Mm-hmm. But, a lot of these towns are like, you step across the street to take a photo of like a theater. It's like you need at least like a 24 millimeter. So I do carry around like a telephoto that's like a 24-70. And I feel like that is my other one that I kind of just keep on there.
Yeah, because I was looking at these pictures, and some of them felt like they were shot in a medium format.
Yeah, I know, and I think that's that 50. Like, I love shooting it because it does give me that feel as well.
Yeah, and the pictures are lovely to linger on. And I think one of the things that's sort of rich about these pictures are just the little details. The right. Signages, the things that are sort of just barely hanging on. I mean, mm-hmm. it's really immersive. That right. Viewers do themselves a disservice by looking at those photographs as if they're just on Instagram, where they just flip. And I think the right. benefit of the book, and especially if you're making prints, is that it really commands people to pay attention.
Right. And that's why I wanted to do a book. And I mean, that was my favorite part about doing the book, is the fact that it actually makes everybody look at these in a different way, because you're right. Like, on Instagram, like, people don't notice that stuff. No. And especially like, doom scrolling, like, constantly. Yeah. But, the photos are how big on Instagram. It's like, you just don't catch so much of the details in these shots. And I think you're right. Like, I think that is one of the elements that I love about my photos, is that there is so much focus on the details. Like, you could just look around a photo and find something, new with like each viewing. I think I think that was absolutely my favorite part about doing a book, is just having people look at it in a different way.
You mentioned that the people who interviewed you previously mentioned the word fine art in terms of your work. I know you went into it just obsessive, just wanted to document it, but this work is fine art as much as it is documentary. But how comfortable are you with sort of embracing that idea?
Yeah, I'm not very. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I've always just kind of like, it's such a funny term, but like, I've always kind of imagined myself as like such a scrappy photographer, and so like when I hear fine art, it's like somehow it necessarily doesn't fit in my brain, because I've always just had that like weird DIY experimental kind of like mindset towards everything that I do. But I take that as a compliment, though, that it's, people view it as like a, fine art.
A joke that I remember forever is, one autofocus picture is a mistake. A large number of autofocus pictures is art. All very subjective. But, I think it's, the word fine art, can express, the commercial aspect of it, how marketable and how sellable it is. But,
yeah, right.
But I think that the fine art also, it's, I think for me, it's pictures that I would just love to live with. Would I like this picture around me in my house or my office all the time just because I like how it feels when I look at it? And I think that can be a photograph of anything, right?
Right.
You're focused on, these evidence of Americana, right? Mm-hmm. But, people can photograph virtually anything and evoke those same sort of feelings. And I think the fact that I can't help but think that the reason why this work is as effective as it is and is consistent as a body of work is because you are really invested in it. Because it's hard to do anything for any period of time with any sort of level of consistency and determination, especially on those days where you really don't want to go out there and do a damn thing, right?
Right.
But having that thing at the core helps you to, persevere during those times when you really are kind of indifferent to it, as much as you may have loved doing it the last time you were around.
Right.
So tell me about those moments. You talked about you enjoyed those trips going out, but there'd be moments where you feel like there are other priorities, other things that you could say, I'm going to prioritize that rather than going out and shooting. And, how do you deal with those moments where it's not as easy to get out and make it happen?
Yeah, I mean, family stuff gets in the way all the time. I have kids, but I feel like even when I can't get out and do those, really long road trips, for a weekend, there's people get so used to living inside their community or their bubble, and they, don't think anything exists, even an hour from them, or they know everything that exists around them. For me, it's even if I have, a couple hours on a weeknight or I need to blow off steam, I will get in the car and I will go, an hour away and find something new to photograph. And that's just, I feel that's just a way for me to, I don't know, keep my brain occupied.
And for people who may be outside of the United States who are not as familiar with the Midwest where you're from, and where you produced a good percentage of this work, what is it about this part of the country that makes it unique, not just in terms of the project, but in terms of that makes it such a distinctive place, especially relative to the subject matter that you were photographing for this book, as opposed to something that's on the West Coast or down in the South or...
Yeah, so another aspect of photography that I, really loved growing up was doing, outdoors photography, nature photography, going to national parks and all of that stuff. But in the Midwest, you don't have any of that. I live in Illinois, which is probably one of the flattest states in the U.S. In terms of landscape photography, it's terrible. So, I really started looking for the really kind of unique aspects of the Midwest. And a lot of that is I'm sorry to say it, but it's desolate kind of scenes. So I really started to just embrace that. The desolate, rural towns. That's what I kind of have to work with in Illinois. But, it's the same as, Iowa and Indiana. So many of these states are just they don't have much of a landscape. So it's more so, finding stuff to photograph. And I feel like the Americana is elements are strong within the Midwest. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think it's an important thing for any photographer to sort of understand because, home base always seems the most boring, least photographic interesting.
I think that's what I was trying to say earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are things that make it unique, and you really have to get out there to find them. I think is what I was trying to get.
Yeah, because for me, I've traveled somewhat in the Midwest, and when I have, for me, it's just I'm really excited by what I see because it's so different from what I'm used to here. Like in Los Angeles, where I go to a big city, and visually, places like that, I just feel like rich. But I know for people who like live there all the time, they're going, that's nothing.
Yeah, like I have to. Like my daughter goes to college in Kentucky, so I have to make a trip from Illinois to Kentucky like every so often, and it's like the majority of the trip is through Indiana, and I do love Indiana, but it's like the landscape. It's just the highways through Indiana are just they're so drab. So I'm always just trying to like get off the highway to, find something cool along the way. But yeah, that's most of the Midwest.
So what's the reaction that you've received now that the book is out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been really, really positive. Yeah, I think it's inspired people, but I think that's the thing that I really want people to get out of the book is to be inspired to take a road trip or just at least experience some of these places. Yeah, I just feel like the book is my way of kind of preserving American culture and, I don't know, just kind of the American story or history.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because as you mentioned, some of these places that you photographed are no longer there. They're gone.
Yeah, there's so many of it. Like, I think even in the last month or so, I think another 2 have been demolished. So it really is, I feel like I'm like in a race. That's part of the obsession too, is just, I feel like I'm like a race to like capture these places before they're gone.
Yeah. Yeah. We lost our house in the fire in January.
Oh no, really?
Yeah. And going through some of my older images, I had pretty much we had photographed around town often because I always had my camera with me, and if I gravitated, I would just make pictures. And there's so much, that's gone now, right? But at the moment that I was making the photographs, it was just like, oh, that looks kind of cool, and it wasn't trying to make fine art. It wasn't anything. But now it's just like, I look at this, I was looking at a couple of pictures this morning, and it was just like, that's never going to look like that anymore.
Right.
And
do you feel like you cherish them, like those photos even more now? Because,
Yeah, so whether it's documenting my own home or photographing like my neighborhood, it has a really high significance for me. I mean, I've photographed LA pretty much the same way, right? With that sensitivity of the things that I loved, and that that I grew up had an affinity for, and that I saw changing or disappearing.
Right.
So that's informed a lot of what I've done in LA. But it speaks to, I think I recognize that interest and that passion in the work here, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on there, because I looked at that and I went, oh yeah, this is more than just, oh, here are these old buildings. I felt that it was more than that, than just making some nice looking photographs.
Yeah. Do you feel like that will influence you going forward, like about documenting certain things?
Yeah, especially I've been photographing the house we're renting, the space, right? Because I was thinking this is just transitory. We're just going to be here for a year. But it's like, this is a seminal year in our lives. So I'm making snapshots around this place because once I move out of here, I'm not coming back to this place, right?
Right.
But a big part of our lives is playing out right now. So I'm making pictures.
And I you'll totally appreciate that later too.
Yeah. So I think, that's, I'm looking at wherever I'm living, wherever I'm staying, wherever I'm out. I'm constantly making those photographs because I never know what meaning these photographs will have later.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it definitely makes you, I don't know, see the spaces a little bit differently.
Yeah.
With that perspective.
But I think, this book goes a long way of being able to preserve things that a lot of people, take for granted. And that you've sort of preserved it in amber to some degree with your photographs, which is, it's great. So I'm really happy that you're, we're determined enough to finish it, but also to get out there and share it with the world.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
So my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend a photographer for our listeners to discover and explore, and it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
Yeah, so I sell a lot of prints through my site. It's run by a company called Framer.art, and Framer.art is it's really, it's run by two photographers. And his name is John Billis. I think it's Bilous. Incredible photographer. He definitely has like a similar kind of vibe to a lot of stuff that I do. It's a lot of it's Americana, but more so I feel like urban and street scenes. I just feel like he has such a great eye, and the colors that he uses, like the whole color palette that he uses, is just incredible.
Cool. I look forward to checking that.
Yeah.
Well, and thank you so much for your time and your generosity. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thanks to Ben for his thoughtful approach to photography and for reminding us that sometimes the act of looking, truly looking, is enough. You can explore viewing hours and more of his work by visiting trope.com or following him on Instagram. You can also support The Candid Frame through Patreon. With a one-time donation, you can also support us at buymeacoffee.com/The Candid Frame. Every contribution helps us to bring you these stories. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our newsletter on Substack. There I share stories about the podcast, but also all things photography. Check it out. Our audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker. And this is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame.